Our next guest writes about legal matters and is one of the best writers in that area. Alison Frankel writes for, among others, Reuters. She updates the On the Case blog many times during the day, I'm told, at Westlaw Next Practitioner Insights. She's a founding editor of the Litigation Daily. She's been covering large-scale litigation cases for more than 2 decades. She's appeared in a lot of our leading newspapers, and she joins us now. Alison, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you, RJ.
Listen, you wrote a story that I think really warrants a lot more attention. I've been aware for some time of the lawsuits surrounding the issue of pelvic mesh implants for women, but your story, which you co-authored with Jessica Dye for Reuters, it puts a new spin on that, already disturbing story. So if you could give us, just to start, a little bit of background on what the pelvic implant cases are about, and then this new angle that you and Jessica wrote about.
Sure, absolutely. So I think everyone who watches television or listens to radio has heard these ads calling for women with pelvic or transvaginal mesh to call their lawyers. This has become, we think, the biggest litigation since asbestos. There are about 100,000 cases out there in state and federal courts. And what the women claim basically is that this mesh product, which was created to alleviate stress, urinary incontinence, which is peeing when you cough or laugh, and other kinds of gynecological problems, should never have been used in women's pelvic regions. That it's made of a material that was never approved for implant there, and there were all kinds of problems with the devices themselves, and they've caused women symptoms ranging from pain during sex to mesh eroding through their digestive systems, through their vaginas, through their cervixes, and really wreaking havoc on their bodies.
Yeah, it's a horrifying story in many ways, I think. So there have been these many cases, and I guess they're still, by and large, still working their way through the courts, right?
Yeah, there've been some group settlements, but the cases are still working their way through the courts. And what we found is that there were so many cases and such a disparity between the value of cases in which women had surgery to remove implants and cases in which women just complained of symptoms from the implants, that this created an opportunity for a new breed of investors. These are folks who figured out a way to basically fund surgery privately for women who had pelvic mesh lawsuits. These women they were either women who didn't have insurance or for whatever reason were talked out of using their insurance and turned to these private investors. And the opportunity for private investors was they would create these networks involving doctors and outpatient surgical centers that permitted them basically to make huge profits from these plaintiffs when the women's cases settled.
So, in other words, and we're talking with journalist Alison Frankel about a new wrinkle in the pelvic mesh cases going on. So, in other words, that what they might do is say to someone who has one of these pelvic mesh implants, we can pay for the removal of it, and they might talk them into it either because they don't have insurance or the co-payments for surgeries under a lot of U.S. insurance plans can run into thousands of dollars. So they might say, we'll pay for everything in return for, I would guess, in return for a percentage of a future settlement.
Sort of. It didn't work exactly that way, but essentially, yes. In return for a claim we're going to make against your future settlement, and for the women we talked to, this seemed like a great deal. I'm not going to have to pay anything up front. They're going to cover everything. They're going to give me money for travel, and I'm going to end up with a settlement that's so big I'm not even going to notice when the time comes. But as you can guess, because you know about the healthcare system, there was a way in which this backfired for the women, of course, because they went into these arrangements without reading the fine print in these very legalistic contracts, and when it came time for a reckoning, it turned out that instead of the $1,000 copay they might have had to pay, or the out-of-network fee they might have had to pay, they were socked with a claim from these lenders for $60,000 in the case of one woman we wrote about. So, suddenly a little bump that wasn't supposed to be noticeable becomes a giant chunk out of your recovery.
So would they hit them with this bill at the time of recovery or even before, or how did that tend to work?
Well, it comes all as a piece as your settlement offer comes in, or as your lawyer tells you, well, here's what we think the case is going to end up being. These are the claims that that the funders are going to make against your settlement. Yeah, so at the time of your surgery, when you are desperate to get your body rid of a product that you think is causing you terrible pain, you're not reading the fine print. You're not necessarily asking these tough questions about, well, how much is this going to end up taking out of my settlement in exact dollars and cents. There's no one looking out for the desperate patient in these situations.
And we're talking with writer Alison Frankel about exploitation of pelvic mesh cases in the United States. And yeah, I think there are implications for this story, Alison, that run very deep, both for the people involved and kind of for the larger health system. But so you have a situation where, first of all, people, as you say, are being assigned to exploitative contracts at a moment of extreme duress. And secondly, you have settlements that are intended to make the patient whole. They're not intended to enrich third parties, but so the net effect is that what might make the patient whole, according to the court, is being eaten into or hijacked for another purpose. And you also report in your story that doctors appear to be, at least one doctor felt that these third-party investors were kind of feeding him language they wanted to see him put in his report, like defective mesh erosion, and now these may be accurate or not, but that he was being told, basically having his medical judgment dictated to based on what would work in court.
Right. That the mesh defendants definitely suspected that this kind of private funding was leading to unnecessary surgeries and basically defrauding the court. That doctors were being told what to say about patients in order to position people for larger recoveries, which, as you said, would then end up in the pockets not necessarily of the plaintiffs, but in the pockets of these third parties who were facilitating these surgeries. I should say that the defendants investigated to some extent. They ran a pretty curtailed investigation and didn't end up finding specific evidence of unnecessary surgeries. But as I said, the investigation was cut short when they started to settle the cases.
Okay, so where does, first of all, where does it, what are we learning here about, if anything, because I think there's a lot we don't know about this story. I think you probably agree with me, but what is this medical funding industry that's doing this, that's setting up these cases and making these then claims against people's settlements? Do we know who these investors are? Do we know? Are we able to question them, for example, identify them and ask them why they think this is an ethical or reasonable thing to do, or is it all kind of still in the shadows?
That's a really great question, and the answer is Jessica and I were able to find a handful of companies that engage in medical funding. They're small. They are very secretive, and we did talk to a few of them, and we heard from them why they believe they're filling a necessary role. What they would tell you is, look, we are providing a service to people who otherwise wouldn't have access to care at all. Either they're uninsured or they don't have the means to get to doctors with true expertise. But what we never were able to penetrate was where the capital is coming from. Mm-hmm. We found that there's anywhere from tens of millions to possibly as much as $100 million out there invested in this kind of funding of surgery for people with personal injury claims. And where that capital is coming from, we just don't really know. These are very small companies. They may be capitalized by their owners. They may be capitalized by investors who are completely in the shadows.
Yeah, it may, of course, we don't know who they are, but I think of other industries that have seemingly small companies, but if you payday lending or whatever, but when you probe, you find, fascinating connections that can lead almost anywhere. I guess I would close by asking you, Alison Frankel, you've covered all sorts of cases, all sorts of litigation. What do you think, if anything, are the larger implications of this story for either our health system or the way we finance all sorts of activities in this country, or the way we put price on things and invest in them? Any broader thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, to me, the real problem here is that this whole system kind of falls between regulatory cracks, and we've pushed state AGs, we've asked the CFPB, and no one immediately says we have the authority to oversee this kind of lending. There's no one who wants to step up and say, when private investors are funding surgery for people, we want to make sure that the people are only having surgery that they should be having and that they're not being overcharged for it. And I think that's a shame. Medical funders told us that in their view, Obamacare has only expanded their opportunities because they say as physicians drop out of insurance programs, when people want to see a particular doctor, they're going to have to turn to funders, which is an interesting and kind of scary point, frankly.
Right. No, I think it points to some issues that need to be addressed with Obamacare, but I think it also, to me, the story is so important because it speaks to I think you are exactly right to go to regulation, because I think it speaks to the regulation of lending, the regulation of investment, the regulation of financing healthcare, the integrity of the judicial system, and whether that's being compromised. And it seems to me that instead of 4 or 5 regulatory bodies competing to make sure they're involved in this. They're all kind of throwing up their hands, and maybe that's the way the laws are written, but they're all kinds of they're all somewhat throwing up their hands and saying, "Gee, it's not my territory."
Exactly, because these are private contracts. These are not banks who are state licensed and regulated. These are private lenders making private arrangements with, as it happens, desperate and unsophisticated counterparties.
Well, it's a disturbing situation, but it was a great piece of reporting that you and Jessica Dye did. So, Alison Frankel, thanks for coming on the program and talking to us about it.
Thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk about it. Really appreciate it.